Between the 1950 seconds and the 1990 seconds, television became a mirror for humanity's biggest fears: nuclear war, technology gone wrong, the end of civilization itself. But every once in a while, something stranger than fiction slipped through the static films and broadcasts that aired once and then disappeared. No reruns, no records, no explanations. They were called television events, but they behaved like sightings appearing suddenly, creating panic, then dissolving into rumor. Special Bulletin, Ghost Watch, Threads, the Bermuda Depths, each blurred the line between entertainment and experiment. Some terrified viewers into believing the apocalypse was happening live. Others seemed to predict the future far too accurately. A few simply vanished without trace, as if erased by the same forces they warned us about. Networks called them mistakes. Governments called them irresponsible. But what if they weren't mistakes at all? What if they were deliberate signals tests of what we could believe, or what we were willing to ignore? Tonight, we're tuning into 15 broadcasts that never truly ended, films that slipped into memory, fragments preserved on warped VHS tapes, and whispered recollections. Stories that still haunt the airwaves decades after their disappearance. Because maybe these weren't lost by accident, maybe someone made sure we'd never see them again. And maybe, by pressing play tonight, you've tuned into something that wasn't meant to find its way back. This is Vaulted Futures, broadcast and erased. Fact has shown The Outer Limits, The Architects of Fear, 1963, ABC. The episode aired once and then the transmission failed. The Architects of Fear follows a team of scientists who disguise one of their own as an alien to unite humanity through fear. During its first broadcast, signals dropped across several states. Viewers reported half-finished sentences, distorted faces, and static that seemed to form words. When ABC replayed the episode a week later, the interference was gone, but so was a fragment of dialogue. A line where the transformed scientist says, "They already know." Official logs list it as a technical issue. Others insist it was removed on purpose. Half a century later, archivists analyzing early kinescopes found ghosted frames, barely visible outlines, not in any script. Whether glitch or message, it fits the show's theme perfectly. Sometimes fear isn't created, it's transmitted. Fact #2, Dark Night of the Scarecrow, 1981, CBS. A small-town horror film aired only once on CBS, then quietly buried. Dark Night of the Scarecrow told of a mentally challenged man murdered by vigilantes, only for something wearing his face to return. Marketed as a simple TV thriller, it aired on the 24th of October 1981, but its ending was so bleak that CBS canceled all reruns. For decades, it existed only on taped recordings passed among collectors. Those who saw the original broadcast remember something else. A slightly longer ending where the Scarecrow's head turns toward the camera before the fade-out, an image missing from every later release. Was it an editing error, a false memory, or a deliberate cut? Either way, the Scarecrow still watches from the gaps between frames. Fact #3, the Max Headroom broadcast intrusion, 1987, Chicago. The 22nd of November 1987, two Chicago television stations are suddenly hijacked. During a news broadcast, the signal cuts to a figure wearing a plastic Max Headroom mask. The background shimmers with corrugated metal, the audio warped beyond recognition. The figure mumbles slogans, swings a prop, and disappears. 90 seconds later, the regular program resumes as if nothing happened. No one ever claimed responsibility. No one was caught. The FCC investigated for years, but found no source, no motive, no trace. The intrusion blurred the line between parody and prophecy. Max Headroom, the AI icon born from a movie about media control, had been used to attack the media itself. The video still circulates online, endlessly analyzed frame by frame. The most unsettling part? The intruder didn't steal airtime for money or politics. He stole it for attention. The first viral act in broadcast history was also the first to vanish without a name. Fact #4, Max Headroom, 20 minutes into the future, 1985, Channel 4 divided by ABC. Before he was a pop culture icon, Max Headroom was a glitch. 20 minutes into the future debuted as a British TV movie, a dystopian vision of a society ruled by media networks, where advertisers literally kill for ratings. The protagonist journalist Edison Carter dies while uncovering a corporate secret, only to have his consciousness resurrected as a stuttering AI named Max. It was meant as satire, but it felt too close to reality. Within a year, the character was franchised into commercials, talk shows, and finally an American series on ABC. Then, in 1987, an unknown hacker hijacked a Chicago broadcast and replaced the signal with the Max Headroom mask, mocking the networks that had commodified him. The intrusion lasted 90 seconds. Authorities never found the culprit. The movie had warned of corporate control. The real world answered by turning its warning into entertainment. Maybe that's how all good prophecies end, by being monetized. Fact #5, The Star Lost, 1973, CTV, divided by NBC. On paper, The Star Lost was ambitious, a Canadian-American space epic about humanity's last survivors drifting through the cosmos aboard a massive generational ship. In execution, it became something stranger, a vision of a future sabotaged by its own limitations. Created by science fiction legend Harlan Ellison, the series was gutted by network interference and filmed entirely on primitive video backdrops. The result looked both futuristic and deeply artificial, like a dream struggling to render itself. Viewers were confused. Critics called it hauntingly empty. After just 16 episodes, NBC buried the series in a late-night slot, never airing the finale. Ellison disowned it, changing his screen credit to Cordwainer Bird. And yet, decades later, its hollow corridors and flickering monitors feel prophetic, like early visions of the simulated worlds we'd all end up living in. Fact #6, The Bermuda Depths, 1978, ABC, divided by Rankin Bass. It aired once, late at night, and then slipped into myth. Produced by Rankin Bass, better known for children's stop-motion specials, The Bermuda Depths was unlike anything else on television. A slow, dreamlike story about a marine biologist haunted by a childhood friend who may be a supernatural sea spirit. The film was shot in soft underwater hues, filled with lingering silences and strange ocean imagery. ABC never re-aired it after the premiere. Some said it was too slow. Others whispered that it felt cursed. Bootlegs surfaced years later from Japanese TV recordings. Their color faded to ghostly blue. For a generation, the Bermuda Depths became a shared hallucination, half remembered, half imagined. Its tagline read, "The sea has many secrets. Maybe television does too." Fact #7, The Quatermass Experiment, 1953, BBC. Before modern sci-fi television existed, there was the Quatermass Experiment, a live BBC broadcast that helped define the genre. The 6-part series followed the aftermath of a doomed space mission. Only one astronaut returns, changed. As his body mutates, London braces for something neither human nor alien. The first 2 episodes aired live to millions. Then disaster struck. No recordings were made, and the broadcasts were lost forever. The surviving episodes exist only in fragmented film inserts, faces blurred, sound warped by time. In the decades since, rumors claim the missing reels were destroyed under BBC instruction. Others insist they were recycled because of technical anomalies in the footage. All that remains are transcripts and faint recollections of viewers who swear the transformation scene looked too real. Perhaps some transmissions were never meant to be preserved. FACT, Hashite, The Disappearance of Flight, 4/12/1974, NBC. On a quiet Sunday night in 1974, NBC aired a low-budget sci-fi movie that looked suspiciously like a government training film. The Disappearance of Flight 412 follows a U.S. Air Force crew tracking unidentified radar blips over California. One by one, their instruments fail. Then their communications go silent. The final half hour takes place inside a featureless military facility where officers question what really happened and whether anyone will ever speak of it again. The film aired once. Some affiliates cut it short midway, citing technical interruption. When NBC replayed it years later, a few frames were missing, dialogue apparently redacted. The muted performances, sterile rooms, and absence of music gave it the weight of a debriefing. Even now, conspiracy forums treat it as found footage. A movie about a disappearance that nearly disappeared itself. Fact #9, The War Game, 1965, BBC. Before Threads or the day after, there was The War Game, the film so realistic that BBC executives refused to air it for nearly 2 decades. Filmed in a documentary style, it depicted the immediate aftermath of a nuclear strike on Britain, panic, rationing, martial law, and the quiet collapse of civilization. Real doctors, soldiers, and civilians played themselves. The effect was unbearable. When BBC reviewed the finished cut, they banned it, citing fears it would cause public distress. Copies were quietly archived under restricted access until 1985. Rumors persisted that private government screenings used it for psychological conditioning. The sound design, radio chatter, and Geiger clicks bleeding into silence felt less like fiction and more like an echo of the future. When the war game finally aired, it was introduced as a historical artifact. But by then, the Cold War was thawing, and the film looked more like prophecy than history. Fact cancellettunosero, Alternative 3, 1977, Aglia Television diviso per ITV. The 20th of June, 1977. Viewers tuning in for a science documentary called Science Report saw something extraordinary. The episode, titled Alternative 3, revealed that global warming and overpopulation had forced the world's governments to secretly build colonies on Mars. Scientists and astronauts had gone missing, relocated, the narrator explained. Then came a supposed transmission from the red planet itself. The segment was so convincing that viewers jammed phone lines demanding answers. Newspapers published front-page investigations. One MP asked for a government statement in Parliament. Only later did Anglia TV reveal the truth. Alternative 3 was an April Fool's joke delayed by scheduling errors. But the damage was done. Many insisted the retraction was itself a cover-up. Bootleg tapes circulated throughout the 80 seconds. When it finally resurfaced online, researchers noted strange anomalies, cuts in the footage, missing time codes, a shot of a Mars landscape that doesn't match any known NASA imagery. Was it just a hoax? Or a warning broadcast too soon? Fact Hassonon, Threads, 1984, BBC 2. If the day after imagined horror, Threads forced you to live inside it. Broadcast in 1984, it followed an ordinary family in Sheffield through the detonation of a nuclear bomb and the months that followed. Cameras stayed after the explosion, birth defects, social collapse, the slow death of language itself. There was no music, no narration, just the relentless grind of survival. Many who saw it live said it didn't feel like fiction. It felt like a live transmission from a future that had already happened. BBC executives debated banning it. Teachers used it in classrooms. Others called it psychological warfare. The film was locked from broadcast for years, returning only as a late-night rerun that drew a cult following. Decades later, the title sequence, white text over black silence, remains one of the most haunting openings in television. Threads didn't end when the credits rolled. It lingered, and for some, it never really stopped. Fact Hasson 2. The Day After, 1983, ABC. The 20th of November 1983, a quiet Sunday in Middle America. Then the screens went dark. For 2 harrowing hours, ABC's The Day After pulled viewers into the unthinkable, a full-scale nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. There were no heroes, no hope, just slow, methodical annihilation filmed like a news documentary. More than 100 million people watched, many believing it wasn't just fiction. ABC had flooded the airwaves with warnings before the premiere, but it didn't help. Hospitals logged panic attacks, crisis hotlines overloaded. Parents shielded their children's eyes when the Kansas sky turned white. In the days after, the government quietly contacted the film's producers. Officially, it was for media impact studies. Unofficially, it was rumored that the White House screened it twice. President Reagan wrote in his diary that it left him deeply disturbed. The Day After aired only once in its full, unedited form. Later releases were trimmed and softened. The master negative still bears a production note. This should never happen again. Fact 13. Ghostwatch. 1992, BBC 1. Halloween Night, 1992. The BBC promised harmless entertainment, a live investigation of a haunted London council house. Families gathered around TVs expecting cheap thrills. What they got instead felt real. Reporters explored the house in real time, while studio hosts fielded calls from viewers. As events grew darker, scratches in walls, children screaming, equipment failing the boundary between documentary and nightmare disintegrated. By 9:50 p.m., the feed collapsed into chaos. The final minutes showed the host staring into the camera as the studio lights burst. Transmission cut to black. The next morning, the BBC was flooded with complaints. Some children needed therapy, one viewer reportedly suffered a fatal heart attack. The program was banned from rebroadcast for a decade and remains one of the most infamous fake live events in British history. The entity in the story pipes was fiction, but those who watched live still swear that after the broadcast ended, their televisions flickered back on for a single frame and something moved in the reflection. FACT Hasson 4, Without Warning, 1994, CBS. The 30th of October 1994, 56 years after Orson Welles terrified radio audiences with War of the Worlds, CBS decided to test how much the world had really changed. Without Warning began as a typical Sunday night news special. Anchors interrupted programming with reports of meteor impacts over Wyoming and then South America. Scientists debated, phone lines cut out, the world began to end live. For 2 breathless hours, viewers believed they were watching the planet's final broadcast. Even with disclaimers before each commercial, the illusion was perfect. Local newsrooms received panicked calls from families trying to locate loved ones in the blast zone. When the credits rolled, CBS issued an apology, but the myth had already spread. Tapes circulated privately for years, often mislabeled as real footage of first contact. In 2019, fragments surfaced on YouTube. The color grading looks unstable, like the tape itself still remembers the panic. A dramatization, yes, but one so convincing that it became its own conspiracy. Fact Hasson 5, Special Bulletin, 1983, NBC. The 20th of March 1983. Viewers in South Carolina turn on the evening news and find chaos instead. A trembling reporter in Charleston announces that anti-nuclear activists have seized a tugboat and armed it with a homemade bomb. Live cameras show the harbor. The feed stutters, someone screams, then silence. What no one realized was that Special Bulletin was a fictional television film styled as a breaking news broadcast. There were no title cards, no dramatization disclaimer, until the first commercial break. Thousands of viewers flooded police lines, believing a nuclear detonation was imminent. NBC's switchboards melted down. The Federal Communications Commission received formal complaints accusing the network of psychological manipulation. By the next morning, the film had been pulled from rebroadcast. All that remained were scrambled VHS recordings and an uncomfortable question. If a story feels real enough to start panic, does it stop being fiction? NBC later restored the missing disclaimer for its VHS release, but many stations refused to air it again. The original master tape remains locked in the network's internal archive, labeled simply Bulletin Live Cut. Bonus fact: The Twilight Zone, The Encounter, 1964. CBS. Officially, it's just a lost episode. Unofficially, it's one of television's first true erasures. The Encounter aired once in May 1964, then disappeared from syndication for over 40 years. It starred George Takei and Neville Brand as 2 men trapped in an attic with a samurai sword that seems to speak and to remember. As the tension builds, guilt, racism, and supernatural vengeance intertwine until one of them takes his own life. CBS pulled the episode immediately, citing viewer discomfort and inappropriate content. For decades, it existed only as rumor, whispered about in fan circles as the banned Twilight Zone. When it resurfaced on DVD in the early 2000s, the studio downplayed the disappearance as a matter of taste. But even now, the original broadcast master bears missing frames, cuts no one can account for. There's a moment near the end where Takei's reflection moves before he does. It lasts less than a second, too short to notice on a first watch, long enough to remember forever. Some transmissions never truly vanish. They just wait until the right frequency finds them again. Maybe none of these were meant to scare us. Maybe they were reminders, ghosts of a world that once believed the screen was harmless. Each of these broadcasts was fiction that felt too real, a mirror we weren't ready to face. Some terrified their audiences, some were silenced by the very networks that created them. But the strangest thing about a lost broadcast is this: it's never really gone. It lingers in our memories, in distorted VHS tapes, in late-night uploads that shouldn't exist. So the next time your screen flickers and a half-forgotten voice cuts through the static, don't change the channel. You might be watching something that was never supposed to be found again.